بفهمه، يعني ما باخد الجواب.
اوكي اوكي، انا ان شاء الله
ممكن.
بجاوب ان شاء الله.
شو، جزاك الله خير.
الله يبارك فيك.
يعني ما باخد الجواب.
اوكي اوكي، انا ان شاء الله. Yeah, أنا إن شاء الله بعطيك. All right, so السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, everybody, and well, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم is what I should be starting with. So yesterday we were doing those ayat, ومن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا أو قال أوحي إلي ولم يوحى إليه شيء. So we talked about who these ayat were revealed on to. Was it in Nadr ibn al-Harith? Was it Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Abi Sarh? Was it Musaylam al-Kadhab Sajah and Aswad al-Ansi? Was it those people, or is it including anybody that might actually do what they had done? And we said العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. So if anybody were to claim that they had received an inspiration or a revelation, or they basically had went out there to claim words and attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that would basically be included as considering them that they had committed the most dangerous sin, which basically is right there creating blasphemy upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also looked at إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي غَمَرَاتِ الْمَوْتِ, and we said that these ayat are mainly, in fact, directed at the disbelievers, or at least those that had attributed words to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or claimed that they were a revelation or an inspiration. We talked about the inspiration piece of it, and we went in some details about those that would claim that they had an inspiration or a gut feeling, or that they were reinterpreting the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they would consider that they have their own interpretation, or this is how and this is very common, and I see it often, that we would have I don't know, hijabi girls. I know we had that at the universities, hijabi girls sitting together, and each one is basically, having a copy of the Quran, and each one would basically say, well, this is how I feel about this ayah, and this is what it's making me feel, and each one is basically getting in with her own interpretation slash her own inspiration, which could actually be a demonic inspiration. So just because you read it in English, or just because you read it in Arabic, that does not necessarily mean that you are doing the right tafsir. The right tafsir needs to go back to the Lugha Arabiya, needs to go back to the scholars that had explained what these ayat mean and what we are going to be getting in terms of 1, lessons, inferences, 3, meanings, and 4, probably the fatawa in it, etc. Because remember, we cannot take those ayat, just like in this ayah, that we cannot take these ayat as تبدونها وتخفون كثيرا. You cannot just expose one piece of it or study one piece of it and basically hide or conceal the rest. So in other words, when you speak of the Quran, you really have to have this knowledge that takes in consideration all the different ayat that were revealed, because the Quran نزل منجما. What is نزل منجما? نزل منجما means it was revealed at different times in different places, and there are certain ayat that did abrogate other ayat. So taking that in consideration is extremely important, and therefore the whole Quran needs to be, let's say, understood and basically learned by that person that is doing tafsir, and you cannot take these portions. So if that's why we would go back to the scholars of tafsir to make sure that we're not making our own tafsir, our own interpretation, thinking that we had our own inspiration to understand this or that ayah. Okay, so we did talk about إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي غَمَرَاتِ الْمَوْتِ, and what each and every single word basically means. الْمَلَائِكَ بَاسِطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ, we talked about, is this talking about al-malaika basically being there to punish them for what they had done, or is this basitu aydihim to mean that the malaika would basically be extracting their souls? So what does it really mean? So we went in these two different opinions. اليوم تجزون عذاب الهون بما كنتم تقولون على الله غير الحق. Today you would be punished with the punishment of al-hun. I want you to look at this one. I think I didn't go in details with the word al-hun. What is al-hun? Al-hun actually means humiliation. Why? Because when we say the root is hana, okay, that's the root. Hana is the root. Why not huna? Because the hana is the past tense, and therefore hana, when you say hana, that actually means you disregard something. Okay, so when you say al-luhun, you're disregarding the person by humiliating them. Okay, hana actually means to disregard and or to be condescending or humiliate. Okay, so when you look at adhab al-luhun, that would be that adjective, well, adverb, and say that this type of punishment is to humiliate them. Wait a minute, why humiliation? Why not say maybe painful on the skin, or maybe, I don't know, make them maybe not breathe? Why humiliation? There is a general qaida, there's a general maxim in the religion that basically says that al-jaza'u min jinsil amal. Wait, can you write that down, sir? Let's write that one down. Okay, I'm gonna write that down. And how did we usually write it down? Let's see if we can write that. Okay, here we go. Al-jaza'u min jinsil amal. What does that mean? So when we look at punishment, a punishment is supposed to be coming from the same type of action. So why is this even important to analyze? We're analyzing it because we're trying to understand when it says adhab al-hun, what did these people commit in order to get this kind of punishment? What these people committed was actually arrogance. Okay, I want you to pay attention to this one, because when you look at al-kibr, arrogance, al-kibr, let's break it down. What does it really mean? Al-kibr, or arrogance, is all about what al-Ghazali had called, he said he doesn't use a certain description for it, and he considered it as a way of exaggerating a nafs. Considered it exaggerating a nafs. And it's quite interesting, you know, what does it mean to exaggerate a nafs? You're exaggerating who you really are, what you resemble, exaggerating that you somehow have inspiration, somehow have knowledge, somehow are displaying, or you contain all of that. So why is kibr even an issue? Okay, why is that even an issue? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says al-kibriya uridai. Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying that al-kibriya, or al-kibriya, is it really arrogance or pride? When you talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-kibr for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is azama, but al-kibr for al-abd is mahana. Okay, what does that mean? So pride for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is magnificence. Pride for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displaying the honor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he speaks of his magnificence, it's not a hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration. Okay? It's not speaking of things that are not realistic. But when al-abd, what is al-abd? Al-abd is a servant, you and I. But when we speak of pride, it contains a lie. Because as much as you thought of yourself that you are intelligent, beautiful, I don't know, contributed this and this, did this, whatever you would say, at the end, it was really bitawfiq min Allah. It was really by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You were lucky to have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically give you this ability to do this. It was really tawfiq min Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, to attribute it to yourself, it contains within it a lie, contains within it the exaggeration, which in the inside of it, it's not actually true that you deserve all the endorsement and all the praise. All the praise goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why we say, Inna alhamdulillah. And before anybody would praise anybody, that you would supposed to always consider that all the praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the same time, it is not the sunnah to praise anybody. Wait, I mean, why not just make them feel good? Okay. The Prophet ﷺ had said, when that man had praised another man, the Prophet ﷺ told that other man that praised the other guy, he said, you had just put in, as if you had basically sprayed and sprinkled their face with soil. كأنما تسفه بالتراب. As if you were putting, what does that even mean? So that's giving us this, like a metaphor. What does a turab do? What does a soil do when I put it on your face? It just goes into your eyes. It kind of blinds you. It makes you not breathe well. If you were to put any of that soil into your face, you can't breathe well, you can't see well, it just closes your eyes. And that's the same thing. When you look at the person that has arrogance, they just don't see the reality. They just see themselves. They just recognize themselves, and they don't even see the reality that it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gave them the power. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gave them the blessings that they had basically that they were basically capable of giving others and sharing with others. And that's not necessarily their own will. That's not necessarily their own giving, but that's actually something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them. Okay, so when you look at this adhab al-hoon, and we said al-jaza'u min jins al-amal, that the punishment is going to be coming from the same type of action, we're trying to break it down because we're trying to say what keeps us away as Muslims from any of these things, these actions, these thoughts, these words that may lead us to this trajectory, to this consequence. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, of course, the person that doesn't believe in all of this, a person that basically believes that they can have and make up their own revelation, they're not going to be listening to this anyways. But this is for a Muslim. Certainly, it's also a warning for them as well. But for a Muslim, this is to basically break it down for us as well and let us know what we should not be doing in order to avoid these consequences. Okay, let's see. So what was that was making them say all of this? It was basically al-mubalagha fi hudud al-nafs. It's exaggerating basically the person's ego, the person's awareness of themselves. If they're only aware of themselves, with arrogance, you look at Fir'aun. His arrogance is what led to disregarding other people's lives. His arrogance in his consideration of his own life, in consideration of his own self, is basically what led him to considering himself as God himself, and therefore whatever effort people contribute in, it should only be in bringing in his life. That's why the pyramids are all about housing basically their bodies. That's all this contains. So it's not to bring them any services. It's to bring the king the services. Were the pyramids at least a place where it was bringing them better food, better water, better maybe health services and what? No, nothing was for that. It was all taking and abusing people's efforts to serve the hereafter for the king and his family. So when you look at the pyramids, yeah, we would see them as, yes, this is an evidence of a civilization that was there. And that's why Islam breaks it down and says, well, actually, this isn't a civilization per se. Islam considers it as a jahiliyyah. This is a jahiliyyah. This is injustice that was practiced upon these people. And then these people were manipulated to make them think that they were practicing their own freedom. They were getting a job. They got the job, and here it is. They're working for the king, but at least, hey, they get food, they get water, etc. They're being paid, or at least some of them were being paid. Majority were not being paid. Of course, Bani Israel were not being paid because they were used as slaves anyways, right? So when we break that down in arrogance, we would say that arrogance contains within it disregarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, two, disregarding people's lives, disregarding people's minds, disregarding people's families and chastity, and then disregarding people's contributions. So the DNAIM rule. So with al-kibr contains every single evil within it. Every single evil within it. So when you see whether the individual or whether it's a country practice some kind of a supremacist country, or whether it's called Zionism, or whether it's called the West, or whatever that country, you know what, even when you had a Muslim country at one point not consider Islam, it also went into falling as well. Simple as that. When any country or any individual practices their arrogance and basically considers that this is their way, and it's really important to understand that the modern politics, by the way, and specifically Western politics, and of course, Western politics, of course, even though Israel is right now considering itself as part of the Middle East, but it actually considers itself part of the West. I mean, thank you for considering yourself part of the West, because you are definitely not part of the Middle East. But anyhow, regardless of all those discrepancies and all those contradictions that they would practice, but what you see is that the Western imperialist system is all about considering that what makes power is basically the abuse of indigenous people, their resources, etc., and regardless of how many were killed. So you look at, for example, Mexico, you look at the Hispanics, you're talking about the complete elimination of almost 60 million people. You're talking about, yes, you're talking about Texas, you're talking about California. This actually belonged to the people of Texas. You're talking about the people of Mexico and the Latinos right there. And even the word Latino, by the way, even the word Latino, it was also not a right description, because that actually comes from the history when the Spaniards, they actually came and invaded South America because they wanted their resources. Why am I talking about the indigenous people, whether we're speaking about North America, South America, or even, of course, what they had considered as the Red Indians, which they were talking about the natives living in the US. They considered that they were basically Indians, therefore didn't deserve life. They would even take away their children and put them in these convents and let the nuns basically abuse them, probably kill them, or let them, abuse them in different ways, and the nuns would basically erase each and every single piece of their identity. But this isn't necessarily just practiced on the Latinos or basically the indigenous people in South America or even North America. But that's the same practice that was practiced on the people in Australia, the same practice that was practiced on the Muslims, basically, and those that were living in Al-Andalus, the same practice that was practiced on Africa as well. In Africa as well. So the whole imperialist idea considers, although they hate the word imperialist because Said, what was his name? What's his name? That Palestinian professor that wrote on Orientalism. I can't remember his name. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot it. Forgot his name, but you know what I'm talking about. Anyhow, he basically had exposed Orientalism and exposed imperialism, and then exposed their arrogance. So they started coming in with a new name. So whether we're speaking about the French and what they had done in Algeria, or until today, refusing to even apologize for all the genocides that they had committed in Algeria, and all that they had committed in different African countries. Same thing if you're talking about Germany as well. So right now you're seeing Germany, the G8, basically. You're seeing Germany, you're seeing the US, you're seeing UK, you're seeing America. Well, America is the US, but you're seeing France, for example. You're seeing those, even Italy with the fascist movement and what they had committed in Libya and even in Somalia, believe it or not. All of that. They would say that, no, if the bully managed to become a great person, managed to overtake people's resources, and managed to create modern societies, and managed to create these quote unquote civilizations, and therefore they managed to be the supreme superpower, that means this is okay to do. So they would consider that it's okay to do something like Gaza, or else they're going to be denying their own history. And that's what politicians are afraid of doing. Because if they were to call what's happening in Gaza as a genocide, that would mean many of these countries, like France, like UK, like the US, if they were to call what's happening in Gaza as a genocide, that would actually mean that they would have to consider their own country as basically an illegitimate country, if they were going to be calling Israel as an illegitimate country, because it is practicing exactly what those countries had practiced in order to create their superpower. What does America stand on? Basically stands on the natives that were there and their corpse, basically. What does Australia stand on? What does France until today stand on with its economy? They're the people in France, the people in Africa are basically supposed to be paying a tax to France, and basically that's funding the lights and funding a lot of different things in France. And yes, believe it or not, so the people in Africa are basically living in poverty because someone else is stealing their resources. Someone else is stealing their resources. But yeah, it's okay to make us seem like we care, and this is cheap caring. Cheap caring is when you want to tell me emotions and you want to tell me that, oh, we're so sorry that you're going through this. Yeah, you're so sorry, but you are the one that actually took my resources. You do recognize that. What does your sorry actually mean? It's nothing but hypocritical. So when the politicians are going to call what's happening in Gaza as genocide, they're going to be exposing their own history, exposing what their countries and what their countries are basically based on. So that's why they won't call it genocide. And that's why you would see the masses, on the other hand, the masses are recognizing their own history for the first time ever in history and recognizing that what did we just do? And you're saying, so absolutely, I know, Africans are waking up, and guess what? It's not just Africans are waking up. You're saying many Africans are waking up, and yes, and they're realizing that no, our history and it was the French or it was the Brits that took away our resources. And right now, you mean, just like we're talking about certain countries right now. Algeria is basically saying, hey, you also an apology, and we're not going to basically have you the one to dictate everything for us. But and right now they're considering, yeah, Arabic is our first language, or this is our identity. So yes, some African countries are waking up. And in fact, even like never before, Gaza had exposed a lot, by the way, exposed a lot, because you are right now seeing something that is unprecedented, whether we're talking about media anchors, or whether we're talking about professors, or whether we're talking about the general masses coming up and actually saying, this is to be exposed. This is the reality. This is what happened. This is what we owe it to people. You're saying even people in the West actually coming up and saying, hey, this is not ethical. This is not moral. This is what is Gaza had exposed. So when you look at Gaza, it's not just a political situation, by the way. Gaza is not a political situation. It's a whole exposure of a certain ideology that was practiced for many years in making the modern imperialism, but giving it a new name. The modern imperialism was, well, before it was considered, and they would call imperialism, but of course when Said had exposed that word imperialism, exposed what it means and what it contains and all of that, that's when they wanted to give it a new name. The West is, was always trying to present themselves that they're bringing in freedom, they're bringing in liberty, they're bringing in education, intelligence, but basically from the white man to the black man. And certainly considering that, of course, with the whole idea of the evolution theory, considering that people were apes at one point, and then, of course, with evolution, that would actually make Africans being closer to apes, and therefore the white people are the last thing of what man basically evolved into, making the white people smarter, and the darker you are, the closer you are to your African origin, ape origin. That's exactly what this whole system was based on. This is exactly what and therefore you don't even have feelings to consider. You are not competent enough to use your resources, and therefore you should not even be regarded as needing for your life to be respected. Your life is not worthy. Your mind is not competent enough to basically think. Your resources, you're not going to know how to use them anyway, so we'll be the ones to reuse those and basically probably give you scraps of those resources later on. Now, alhamdulillah, Gaza had exposed all of this, and even the people in the West had come to, right now, I would say, to see with this social media, basically letting them see, this is what you had forgotten. This is the reality that we're living in, and this needs to basically end. This injustice needs to end. And right now, I was so surprised to actually see even non-Muslims, mind you, okay, non-Muslims right now. I know it's not that plenty, but we are seeing non-Muslims actually make videos on why Sharia is better for America than democracy. All right. I mean, of course, as a Sharia specialist, I would say, wow, and and especially, well, I'm not only a Sharia specialist, but my master's was on the stereotypical images of Muslims and Islam and Muslims in the neoconservative media. So the word Sharia was nothing but what this scarecrow to make everyone afraid of Islam, that it's going to amputate people's arms, it's going to take away people's freedoms, it's going to lock in women and all of that, lock up women and all of that. And right now we're seeing people actually become more aware of Sharia, and that it is actually a better alternative. I mean, I can understand a Muslim saying that because you would believe in Islam. Of course you're going to say that. But a non-Muslim right now, actually non-Muslims making videos of this is, I would say, the spark, inshallah, to bring great light onto humanity. I'm actually very optimistic, to be honest. And I know that we see what's happening in Gaza. Definitely, it's a major atrocity. Definitely, there's no question that it is a calamity on not only the people of Gaza, but I know many had also gotten into this fitna, their own selves gotten into this confusion. Well, why is this suffering still happening? Why can't we stop it? Why isn't Allah intervening? Is when people would start to get into this confusion and questioning all of that. And of course, we would know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in his hikmah, we're not saying leave the situation in this carnage and this suffering. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's not that the people of Gaza, they just somehow just didn't know how to make their own money, didn't know how to make their own civilization. But it was something that was induced. It was something that was imposed on them. Okay. وَلَقَدْ جِئْتُمُونَا. Sorry, everybody. I know I'm still living in that area. وَلَقَدْ جِئْتُمُونَا فُرَادَى كَمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. So, in fact, look at this one. وَكُنْتُمْ عَنْ آيَاتِهِ تَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. Here we go. So there's that تَسْتَكْبِرُونَ and the reason for عَذَابِ الْهُونَ. And certainly talking about الظلم. الظلم is only practiced dhulm is only practiced when someone basically is practicing that arrogance. So here the sister beautifully put in this little formula and said taqdeer equals ilm plus hikmah plus qadar. Qadaruhu. Right. Taqdeer, definitely. It's basically the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plus the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And mashallah, khasatullah, I could definitely see a very, very, very smart girl right there. And yes, inshallah, you will be inshallah a scholar one day. Very smart, very, very smart girl. Okay. وَلَقَدْ جِئْتُمُونَا فُرَادَى كَمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَتَرَكْتُم مَّا خَوَّلْنَاكُمْ وَرَاءَ ظُهُورِكُمْ وما نرى معكم شفعاءكم الذين زعمتم أنهم فيكم شركاء لقد تقطع بينكم or بينكم. Remember two قراءات. وضل عنكم ما كنتم تزعمون. And you had come in individuals, and those individuals, they had basically come furada, as when we say individuals, in other words, they don't have any supporters, they don't have anybody that is that is giving them the support, basically. كما خلقناكم أول مرة. But some scholars, they said that they had explained it to Muna Furada, that it is not talking about being as separate individuals and basically not coming in with all their supporters. But they said, كَمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ is giving the inference that the way we had created you before, in other words, as naked. Why speak about naked? In other words, there is no garment that you can probably use to conceal anything, not only about your physical part, but also about yourself. You are basically fully exposed to the Lord Almighty. and fully exposed inside and outside, and therefore nothing to hide. كما خلقناكم أول مرة, the way you were created the first time is basically the way that you will be resurrected. Okay, so, and of course, the scholars that said it was كما خلقناكم أول مرة to mean naked, they basically used and referenced the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ had actually said in the hadith, يحشر الناس حفاة عراة غرلا. I think we actually got that hadith right there. No, not this one. This one right there. يحشر الناس حفاة عراة غرلا. We talked about this one, and we said غرلا, so people will be resurrected. حفاة meaning barefooted, عراة naked, and غرلا not circumcised. Okay. وتركتم ما خولناكم وراء ظهوركم, and you had left all that you were given as in terms of potentials. So when we look at the word خولناكم, in other words, the potentials that you were given, basically all the different things that were considered as advantages. In other words, the different advantages that you were given, you now leave it behind. And that is giving us the inference that the advantages that you have in this life, whether we're speaking about money, intelligence, all of those advantages that you have, they're basically supposed to be used in order to help you get to the akhirah, get to Jannah. وَمَا نَرَى مَعَكُمْ شُفَعَاءَكُمُ الَّذِينَ زَعَمْتُمْ أَنَّهُمْ فِيكُمْ شُرَكَاء. And now we don't see شُفَعَاءَكُم, basically the things that can intercede for you, or probably what you had worshipped, what you had believed in, etc. Now it's not there to give you the support. لَقَدْ تَقَطَّعَ بَيْنُكُمْ or بَيْنَكُمْ. Now you, they are separated from you, and you are separated from them. So basically, both meanings from both قراءات. وَضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَزْعُمُونَ. Now, and now everything that you had claimed as basically the reason, the purpose behind life, or what would give you life, etc., now is ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ. When you say ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ, it can mean to get lost away from you. And ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ could also mean it's not part of you anymore. ضَلَّ عَنْكُمْ, it's not part of you, it's separated from you, it basically got lost, you got lost. In other words, when we talk about loss, we're not talking about loss meaning it can't find its way, okay? But we're speaking about that there's the separation between both of you. In other words, that this cannot be considered as your identity any longer, because you yourself will want to deny that that was your identity. So even when they were questioned, is this what you used to associate partners with? They would say, no, it isn't. Why? Because they know that at that moment that there's no way, how did I at one point actually believe that this was associated with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So then at that moment, they would disregard or even deny any association with those gods or with this type of culture. I want you to look at the word culture right here, because like we were saying earlier, culture does not just come out of the blue like that. A culture is tracing back to a certain ideology. And this is extremely important, especially for the younger generation that's living in the US, specifically the US, because many don't realize that the culture, of course, that what comes with the US is feeling superior. Okay, the pride that, hey, what you are supposed to be proud of being American is really having the pride of being American, proud to be the superpower, proud to be, etc. But what they don't realize is that coming with that culture is arrogance. Part of the American culture is really containing with it the arrogance. And that's why you would say a lot of the American culture actually contains embedded within it a lot of that kufr, that basically, whether it's atheism or whether it's denial of others, or whether it's denial of akhirah, or whether it's denial of purpose, or whether it's denial of even feeling guilty, etc. There's so much within that culture, we would think of it as, oh, it's just an American way of saying things. It's not an American way of saying things. It's actually coming in. If you were to compare America in the 80s or in the 60s or in the 70s, that's not the America that you see today. That's not the America that you see today. America was, in its foundation, was actually Christian, was actually the Puritans. Okay, that was the beginning. What you see America before is completely different than what America today. The hijack of atheism is what developed the new way of American culture, the modern type of culture is not necessarily American, because American used to be Christian. Okay. Right now, this is the modern way of atheism, basically hijacking the new culture, the new generation, and telling them that this is what it means to be American. So all this LGBT, all of this feminism, all of this was not necessarily American. This, because we would say, just looking at history, looking at the words, looking at the culture, looking at the ideas, etc., then you would see what is actually influencing the modern culture, what's influencing the minds, what's infiltrating the education system, what's infiltrating the culture. And what you see now is not the America that I mean, yeah, I wasn't there, and probably in the 60s. Okay, I wasn't there in the 60s, but I'll tell you for sure that my mother was actually a schoolgirl in the US in the 60s, and she was telling me that they would make fun of her because she was wearing hijab. Okay, and they would call her a Lizzie, which basically means a lesbian, because that was seen as a derogatory thing. Just see America back then and see America today. The infiltration of the atheist culture is not only affecting the US, but it's also affecting, through globalization, through social media, through all these different, even foods, believe it or not. This is actually infiltrating and forcing itself even outside of the American society. You have to keep that one in mind, because when you look at whether you're seeing Malaysia, you're seeing India, you're seeing Pakistan, you're seeing the Arabi world. Oh my God, the Arabi world. To be American is to be cool. To be American is to be advanced. To be American is to be, yes, strong, etc. That's what they would say, because of course, the media portrayed through the political system that to be American is to basically get all the privileges. Therefore, you are the most privileged person. If you are the most privileged person, therefore, you are the most important person. If you are the most important person, therefore, yes, you can then consider that others are inferior. The second that you consider others are inferior, that's basically going to build in a certain mindset, a certain behavior, that others are supposed to be less in their dignity. They're supposed to be your place of mockery because they see the world differently. And this is extremely dangerous. And believe it or not, our children, many times, basically, without them realizing, it becomes this subconscious mind that basically absorbs all this culture without us realizing. Absorbs this culture, and then we start behaving based on it. And that's why it's important. No, teach your children their identity as Muslim. Teach your children Islam, and also let them recognize kufr. Because if they don't recognize kufr, then they don't know Islam. In order for you to know Islam, even the Quran would tell you, well, this is what kufr would do. This is what a kafir person would do. This is what a zalim person would behave in, etc. If you look at the Quran, it's exposing dhulm, it's exposing oppression, It's exposing injustice. It's exposing wrong behavior. It's exposing kufr. It's exposing all of that, whether as an individual or whether as a political entity, just like Pharaoh. This is extremely important. If your son or daughter, they don't understand that what it means to be Muslim is farther than just practicing as an individual, but it means what identity you carry towards these people that basically carry your faith as Muslim. So this isn't just an issue of, yeah, some people are going through some kind of an injustice. No, they're going through an injustice, not because they are Palestinian, but because of their rejection to get included within this bigger system, whether it's the capitalist system or whether it's the white supremacist system or whatever. Of course, when you look at most of the Jews, most of the Zionists actually in Israel, most of them are not actually Mizrahi. What is Mizrahi? Mizrahi is actually Eastern Jews. Most of them are not Eastern Jews. Most of them are actually Russian, Polish, Lithuania. So most of them are actually Ashkenazi Jews. That's why even when you speak when Benjamin Netanyahu would speak, he speaks with a very good American accent. Very good American accent. This guy's all American. Okay. And because when you look at what Israel really is resembling, Israel is resembling right now the Western hegemony upon basically a growing Muslim entity. Keep that in mind. It was a growing Muslim power. It's just a small thing. By the way, the people that are resisting all of that, they're just a very small group, by the way. You know what I mean by a very small group? We're just talking about what? 4,000 people, 3,000 people, 5,000 people. That's a very small group. A very small group. Very, very small group. But even if any Muslim power is actually growing even by a very small group to the Western hegemony, that is considered dangerous. Even if they're very small, and guess what? They don't even have these sophisticated ammunitions. They don't even have that. But even if it's a small amount of a small group of people basically resisting the Western hegemony, that to the Western hegemony is, okay, you dare to do that? But even if it's a small group, imagine if this was a country, a Muslim country, like probably Pakistan, okay? A Muslim country like Pakistan, which basically has nuclear power, was to stand up and actually say, and that's what happened when India basically attacked it. And basically they were like, yeah, you want to think that we're not capable and not competent, and yeah, so we'll show it to you. And boom, right there. That's when India was like, oh, we got to figure this out. We didn't think that we're going to be that strong. So imagine if this was a Muslim country like Pakistan were to actually grow and actually say, hey, we're going to be a Muslim power right there, or probably even something similar, maybe I don't know, a union between Pakistan and Turkey possibly, or yeah, that's definitely something that they would worry about. All right, let's continue right there. Inna Allah faliqul habbi wan nawa. I want you to look at this ayah because this ayah is quite interesting to be after these ayat. وَلَقَدْ جِئْتُمُونَا فُرَادًا, etc. And to be after these ayat, first of all, what does it mean? So we can break it down and understand the relationship between these ayat and then trying to basically understand all of the relationship. Let's see. We're going to first translate it, okay? And then we're going to take it bit by bit. إن الله فالق الحب والنوى يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي ذلكم الله فأنى تؤفكون. Okay, The Lord Almighty is the one that split the seeds and the coring, basically the seed and the coring. He would get from the living a dead person or a dead thing, and he would extract from the dead a living thing. That is the Lord Almighty. How do you deny all of that, basically? فالق الإصباح وجعل الليل سكنا والشمس والقمر حسبانا. He is the one that splits the dawn and makes the night a place of tranquility. The sun and the moon are in orbit or movement or fire. We're going to say ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. That is based on the numbering or the intricate creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, al-Aziz, the self-efficient, the one that is in complete knowledge. وهو الذي جعلكم النجوم لتهتدوا بها في ظلمات البر والبحر. And he had made the stars to guide you in the darkness of the land and sea. وقد فصلنا الآيات, or قد فصلنا, there's no what. قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يعلمون. We had given intricate details in these verses for people to know, or for people of knowledge. وهو الذي أنشأكم من نفس واحدة فمستقر ومستودع. Hold on, let me delete all of this. Okay, and he was the one that created you from one soul in a place that would be instilled, and also a place that would be preserving. قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يفقهون. We had given the details of these verses for people that comprehend. وهو الذي أنزل من السماء ماء فأخرجنا به نبات كل شيء فأخرجنا منه خضرا نخرج منه حبا متراكبا ومن النخل من طلعها قنوان دانية وجنات من أعناب والزيتون والرمان مشتبها وغير متجابه انظروا إلى ثمره إذا أثمر وينعي إن في ذلكم لآيات لقوم يؤمنون. And he is the one that sends down from the skies water. We would extract from it different plants of all things, and we would from it extract greenery, which comes out of it seeds that would be accumulated, and from the palm trees the pollen that basically قنوان دانية, the branches that are close branches to you, and different gardens of grapes, olives, pomegranates that are similar and different and not similar. Look at its produce or its fruit when it produces, and the ينعي when it starts to pollinate, basically. إن في ذلكم, in that there are signs or ayat, or signs or evidence for people that believe. وجعلوا لله شركاء الجن وخلقهم. And they had made the jinn, so we're going to go jump to this one, made the jinn, or attributed the jinn to being the partners of the Lord Almighty when the Lord Almighty had created them. And they had attributed or claimed sons and daughters with no knowledge. All the praise and nothing like unto the Lord Almighty, the Most High, over all that they claim and say or describe. بديع السماوات والأرض. He was the one that, He is the magnificent creator of the heavens and the earth. أَنَّا يَكُونُ لَهُ وَلَدٌ وَلَمْ تَكُنْ لَهُ صَاحِبَةٌ. How would he have a child or beget a child when he did not have a female friend? وَخَلَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. And he created everything. وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. And he is all-knowing in everything. A couple of things to see in these ayat. Okay, we're just going to break it down. Okay. So what we see in these ayat, there's definitely that there's definitely that idea that it's telling us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically creating from the seed, and then it grows to tell us about the sun and the moon, and then it grows to tell us about the function of it, and how the function even between these beings is basically from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that all the different details are basically created from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then to tell us in the end, to tell us that all of this that you would see from the seed to the sun to the moon to what puts all these pieces together is basically coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Badi'u samawati wal ard. You know, I love how I don't know, but the person that wrote the Quran, I think his name is Uthman Taha. This is a modern guy. This is a modern Syrian guy. He was the one that scribed the Quran, what you see today. He was the one that scribed it in this way. But when I see and analyze the way that he had scribed it, this guy is a genius. When you look at the pages in the Quran, he was not just a genius in drawing and writing the Quran, but he was also a genius to unite and at least put the ayat that flow within the same subject most of the times as within the same page. Of course, that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it. We know that piece of it. But you could see that there is also, that within one page, he put basically the same idea, or at least the same theme in the same page, because, of course, then, goes on to the second page. ذَلِكُمُ اللَّهُ رَبُّكُمْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ خَالِقُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ فَاعْبُدُوهُ وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَكِيلٌ. Definitely. I mean, it goes with it. So this would be after putting out that idea, then it basically tells you, well, okay, now I want you to recognize your Lord Almighty. So first it lays out the magnificence to see for you to recognize. And then it basically onto the second page, it basically tells you, okay, now that you recognize basically Allah as an ilah, now I want you to recognize Allah as a Rabb, as a ma'bud, okay, as the one to worship. Okay. And of course, when you look at Tawheed, it basically goes into the category of recognizing the existence of Allah as an entity, basically. And 2, recognizing the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And 3, recognizing the names and attributes. And you could see how later on you would say, and oh, here we go, here's al-ubudiyya on this page, and it was basically taking you what that means in terms of ibadah, and then it would take you right there to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how to recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his names and attributes. Okay, but on this page, a couple things, I must admit, I had actually needed to go to multiple tafsir in regards to these ayat because I had a couple questions. So yes, al-Qurtubi, it basically broke down the ayat and was basically talking about the words, the meanings, and all of that. And certainly this is important, but I still did not have my questions answered. Why talk about these subjects? Why talk about these things? And when, after talking about وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا, after talking about مَا قَدَرَ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ, etc., why talk about it now? Why bring it up right now when other ayat basically talked about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is faliqul habbi wal nawa, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of the heavens and the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the moon and the sun husbana. So why bring it up again? And the only mufassir, I went to a number of them. The only mufassir that I would say hit the nail in explaining this was actually Tahir ibn Ashur. Tahir ibn Ashur is a genius. He was a Tunisian scholar that I must admit, like I said and many times, and I will continuously say it, he did not get the appreciation that he deserves. He didn't get the appreciation that he deserves for a number of different reasons. Number one is that we would perceive modern as not as important as the people that lived before. That's one thing. Number two, I think al-Maziri Publishing Company didn't do a good job in I guess making a good printout for his book. The printout for his book contains a lot of mistakes. I mean, a lot of mistakes, a lot of typos, a lot of missing words, etc. And it's like, you really ruined this man's work. Okay, so maybe I should contact maybe that publishing company and probably say, hey, after reading almost 10 volumes from Tahrir with Tanwir and Tahir ibn Ashur, I already have all those areas highlighted. Maybe one day I'll contact them and say, hey, this is what you need to correct in your book. Anyhow, the other reason I would say is that modern scholars also did not give that appreciation by mentioning the scholar's work and his contribution to the people. And number three, certainly because he was from Tunisia, not necessarily affiliated with any organization, so he wasn't considered as Salafi or Ikhwan or any political group. And sometimes when you're not affiliated with a certain group, the people within your group, they would be the ones to highlight your work because it means a lot to that organization. And I think it's about time that the Muslims would go beyond this organization type of thing and know and acknowledge other contributions. Because Tahir ibn Ashur was not affiliated with any particular political group, he was basically not given the appreciation that he deserves. That was another thing. Okay. What is the point that he wanted to make? So I love how Tahir ibn Ashur, I'm going to erase all of this because I need to erase it. I'm just going to, take out basically that and just make it into this. Okay. I want you to first zoom out. Okay. When we zoom out, I want you to see a couple things here. Okay. And what Tahir ibn Ashur was saying, he was looking at this. He was definitely, I'm sure, he zoomed out and he was looking at certain words. He was saying, well, let's look at the word faliq and let's look at the word yukhrij. What was he saying? He was looking at certain words that show force. And based on that, he was saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was showing us a couple things here. Number one, he was showing us the force that that was basically working within nature, and that's the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether it is to create a certain force in splitting basically a seed, or in letting something come out, or in letting something come out, whether we're speaking about life or death. And this is important. Let's highlight, these words, that some words, we're going to look at them in just a bit. Okay. So here we go. Al-mayyit and al-hayy. And you've got faliq and yukhrij. And then you've got another faliq right there. Okay. And then yet it said ja'ala al-layl and not falaq al-layl. We're going to talk about that. So, here, I'm just going to put in a couple points and then I'm going to tell you what Tahir ibn Ashur was seeing. Okay. He said, جعل الليل and not فلق الليل. And he said in that, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned al-mayyit and al-hayy, he also mentioned al-hab and al-nawa, and also mentioned al-shams and al-qamar. What's the relationship الشمس and القمر? And then continues ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم, that here's a lesson. So the ones that are in a lesson, we're probably going to use a different color. We're going to use the red color to see the lesson. ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. Now we're going to highlight certain names. وهو الذي جعل النجوم. Now here we go. النجوم is basically right there. جعل النجوم, and النجوم is going to be basically in, oops, it's supposed to be a blue color. Okay, we're going to see those things highlighted in just a bit and understand what the relationship between these are. Okay, لتهتدوا. لتهتدوا is going to be basically, here we go, we're going to be talking about a red color because this is supposed to be the purpose. في ظلمات البر والبحر. So this is basically ظلمات البر والبحر, as basically the taking us back to al-mayyit and al-hayy, al-shams and al-qamar. Oh, I should have actually just underlined that. Sorry about that. Should have just, where's the blue? Oh, here's the blue. Okay, so ظلمات البر والبحر, and here we go. Let's go with this one and take out the highlight. Okay, قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يعلمون. Okay, so فصلنا الآيات, what are we doing? This is a purpose. A purpose right there. Here we go. فصلنا الآيات لقوم يعلمون. We're going to get to the rest. Okay, let's see. وهو الذي أنشأكم من نفس واحدة. النفس الواحدة was along with الشمس القمر, الميت الحي, and الظلمات والبر, or ظلمات البر والبحر. Okay, فمستقر ومستودع. That's basically the purpose. Okay, what do we got? What are we doing this right thing here? Oh, what am I confusing things? Hold on. We said we're going to use al-hayy, al-mayyit. Okay, so that was supposed to be in blue. And the ones in red were basically the purpose. Okay, so I'm confused this one. Okay, this was supposed to be blue. Okay, here we go. The nafs wahid is supposed to be blue. Okay, mustaqarr and mustawda is supposed to be red, because that's the purpose. مستقر ومستودع. قد فصلنا الآيات لقوم يفقهون. That's a purpose. Okay, here we go. وهو الذي أنزل من السماء ماء. We're going to put the blue. Where was it? Because it's talking about a substance. ماء فأخرجنا به نبات كل شيء فأخرجنا منه خضرا نخرج منه حبا متراكبا من النخل طلعها قنوان دانية جنات من أعناب والزيتون والرمان مشتبها وغير متشابه انظروا إلى ثمره إذا أثمر وينعي إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يؤمنون. Okay, now we're going to get our red color again, and we're going to say أن وهو الذي أنزل. We're talking about a purpose. من السماء ماء أخرجنا, a purpose, and نخرج, a purpose, and then مشتبه وغير انظروا, a purpose, and إن في ذلكم لآيات لقوم يؤمنون, a purpose, and جعلوا له شركاء. Okay, this is basically the theme right there, and بديع السماوات والأرض, this is the theme. Okay, let's see, what do we get all of this? I tried to break down as much as I can. Oh, we forgot the process. Hold on. So we said فالق, we said يخرج, جعل, and مستقر ومستودع كده. فصلنا, here we go. أخرجنا, here we go. And let's say, and وغير انظروا إن في ذلكم لآيات لقوم يؤمنون. Okay, so here's what Tahir ibn Ashur was saying. I want you to look at these colors. Okay, what do we get out of these colors? We got a blue color, which basically is talking about a substance. Okay, we've got a red color, which basically would highlight the purpose. We've got the yellow color, which is to basically highlight the action that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had done. Okay, so what is that supposed to mean? This is to tell us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is faliq. يخرج الميت من الحي. Well, الميت من الحي can actually be both. Can be الميت meaning the dead and the living thing. So this is basically telling us of substance, but it also tells us of a certain work. And فالق again, جعل. Let's break it down first. فالق means to split something. الحب and النوى. يخرج الحي من الميت. مخرج الميت من الحي. What is فالق? فالق is to split. Splitting what? Splitting the seed. And what? And the Noah. In Noah, they're basically the seed for the dates. يخرج الحي من الميت. What is يخرج? يخرج is basically ejecting something and getting something out of something. That's يخرج. In other words, it was a living thing inside a dead thing. Think of an egg. The egg is basically a dead thing, but inside of it was a living thing, which basically is whatever reptile, whatever bird that is in it. Okay, so that is basically يخرج الحي من الميت. In other words, you're looking at a process, a paradigm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically uses, whether it is to split something. In other words, what may appear as a dead thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings life from it. Here, what may appear as a dead thing, nothing but the shell, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought out of this shell a living thing to make a plant. What appeared as a dead shell, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought within it, from it, a living thing. What appeared to be a dead thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought something that is basically a living thing. ذَلِكُمُ اللَّهُ فَأَنَّى تُؤْفَكُونَ. That is the Lord Almighty, and therefore, how would you deny? Deny what? Deny that the one to control the power to get out of something that may appear as dead, to bring something that is living in it, out of it, is basically the force. So therefore, the force is not inside that element that you had seen, but is actually the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make that actually work its way. It doesn't work its way outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. Let's see this one. فَالِقُ الْإِصْبَاحِ. The one that again used the word فَالِق. Why use the word فَالِق? Tahir ibn Ashur said that is to show us whether we're speaking about small things or whether we're speaking about huge things, that it uses the same force. The same force that is used in small living things is the same force that brings in big things that you would say in the morning, in the same way that it was ripped to come in as basically this seed to bring in the plant, the same way that you would see the horizon ripped by the Lord Almighty and therefore making the earth like a small seed. And therefore you would see this al-isbah, morning, in the horizon rip as bringing in life. Just as this hab, just as this seed was looking like it doesn't have any life in it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rips it open in order to bring in life. That's the same way that you would say that this seed, like the earth, is basically looking like there's no life in it, and boom, right there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rips the horizon to bring in the sunlight to make the dawn. But here's one thing. Why did it say جعل الليل and not فلق الليل? Tahir ibn Ashur says that al-layl is supposed to be just plain darkness. And therefore, it's more in the nothingness. So darkness is basically the result of no light in it. And therefore, جعل الليل, made the darkness of night. So even when something may be seen as nothingness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also has his power in what you may regard as plainly no force being put on it. So in physics, we would say if something is idle, therefore there's no power in it. But according to this ayah, just because something is idle, it does not necessarily mean there's no force in it. There's no force in it, or there's no life in it. There's no energy in it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that even in that darkness, there is an energy to make it dark. There is an energy that was put by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it dark, meaning to not have the energy of light. In other words, even darkness is a type of energy. Even darkness is a form of power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would display even in something that you may consider lacking basically light or lacking force. And that's why he said, جَعَلَ اللَّيْلَ, the word was sakana. So even when something is idle, when something is not showing movement, it does not mean that it lacks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power in it. No, even in something that may not show to you as containing energy, as containing movement, it is basically another type of movement, another type of force, another type of physics. Basically within that is جَعَلَ اللَّيْلَ سَكَنًا. What makes al-isbah, what makes al-layl, is basically the husbana, the orbit, the movement of al-shams and al-qamar. The moon, the sun, and the moon is what basically created al-layl and al-isbah. It is what created the morning, the dawn, and basically the night. And how? Well, ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. That's based on the taqdir. What is it, taqdir? Taqdir meaning the intrinsic calculation. Okay? The intrinsic calculation, the specific, the detailed, the very specific calculation of al-Aziz. Why al-Aziz? Why not, for example, al-Qawi al-Mateen? For example, al-Aziz is the one that is self-efficient. Al-Alim, the one to have great knowledge. Okay, so when you say Al-Aziz, how is that something that we should relate to all of this? In order to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when he had created the universe, he does not benefit from this creation, but all of the different laws that you would see in nature, that those laws in nature basically are created for you. You need the sunshine, you need the night, you need the sukoon throughout the night, you need this food in the seed, you need all of this process. The Lord Almighty is not in need of this process, but you are in need of this for your own existence. But the Lord Almighty is Al-Alim. He's all-knowing in how to make this possible, and all-knowing in creating the purpose of why he wanted to make it. وَهُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. I want you to look at this one. So we got فَالق, you got يُخْرِج, you got فَالق again, you got جَعَلَ. Here's again جَعَلَ. جَعَلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا. Wait a minute, so why جَعَلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ? Ja'ala is different than falaqa. Falaqa means to split. Ja'ala actually means that something was created, but then the purpose of it was also created. Meaning, so this is the najm, this is a star, okay? But the star itself has a different function. That function is also created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only did he create the element, but he also created the function. Even the function is a creature. Even the function is a creature. In other words, the power, the energy, the force, the function, all of that was created and assigned by Taqadir al-Aziz al-Alim, by the Lord Almighty, who basically determines the amount, the function, and certainly the purpose of everything. وهو الذي جعلكم النجوم لتهتدوا بها. And he made the stars be something that you would find guidance through them in ظلمات البر والبحر, in the darkness of the land and sea. Wait a minute, so why جعل النجوم لتهتدوا بها في ظلمات البر والبحر? Do we actually use a nujum for guidance? How is it that we use stars for guidance? Yes, you would use stars for guidance because the landscape that you have around you, when you are on that landscape, you may get confused as whether you are going north, west, south, east. And the easiest way is looking at the sky. So think of it as basically the map, because that is still in the earth. When you are walking on it, you can confuse the landscape as you're walking on it, because you're a tiny creature in this big sphere thing, and you're not knowing this landscape to know whether this is north, south, east, west. If you were going to depend on the landscape itself cannot give you necessarily the information about this earth unless you had already recorded and known before whether this is north, west, south, etc., and you based on that. But that's why the Arab used to use the stars as their way to know their direction. Why? Because in the middle of the desert, there's not a lot of landscape. There's not a lot. The terrain is basically one. It's all desert. There's no hill for me to consider tree or probably mountain or probably valley. It's just one plain desert just before your eyes. So what did they use in order to figure out their destination? They used the stars. They used the stars to figure out their destination. So وَجَعَلَ لَكُمُ النُّجُومَ لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا فِي ظُلُمَاتِ الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. Made the stars be something that would guide you in the darkness of the sea, the land and sea. قَدْ فَصَّلْنَا الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. Given in detailed ayat. I want you to look at this one. And then فَصَّلْنَا الْآيَاتِ. What is it, tafsil? Tafsil is to give details upon details and explanation. لقوم يعلمون. So لقوم, for people that would know. وهو الذي أنشأكم. Oh, we should have actually put a red marker underneath that one. Or was it? No, it's supposed to be highlighted. أنشأكم. Here we go. أنشأكم من نفس واحدة. What is the difference between أنشأ and جعل and فلق? أنشأ is to create for a specific purpose. That's ansha. So created for a specific purpose, all of you from one soul. And some, or فمستقر. Mustaqar actually means that it would be something that would find a place of tranquility, a place of positioning. Al-mustawda' is a place of preservation. We're going to get into details with that one. قد فصلنا الآيات. We had given details in those ayat for people to comprehend. وهو الذي أنزل من السماء ماء, and he's the one that sent down. I should have actually highlighted this one in red and yellow. من السماء ماء, from the skies, water. فأخرجنا, and we had, again, أخرجنا. What is the difference between أنشأ and أخرج? أخرج, to get something out. In other words, there was another process that was already happening out there, but to get it out of something, that was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. نبات كل شيء, the different plants of everything. فأخرجنا, we should have actually highlighted this one. خضرا نخرج منه حبا متراكبا, and we would get out. Notice أخرج, أخرج, and نخرج. What is that supposed to highlight? That you're looking at right there. Let's see. What is that supposed to highlight? What do we got? We're going to go out a little bit. Okay, let's see. You got فالق, you got يخرج, and again it used يخرج. We got when you يخرج الحي من الميت, and here أخرجنا نبات كل شيء. أخرجنا منه خضرا نخرج حبا. What is that supposed to mean? That the relationship between going back, what you see in force, whether things coming out as a force or as a process, or whether you, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you, I want you to look at al-hayy and al-mayyit, the dead things and the living things and how they come out. I want you to understand that this process of the dead coming out of the living thing and the living coming out of the dead is the same exact idea of how plants would come out in the same way. In other words, even you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically told us that we would come out as plants. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that the process, whether in the beginning of creation, as al-hab wal-nawa, as a human being, you yourself are basically similar to al-hab wal-nawa, with the sperm basically coming out of that sperm comes out a human being, and out of that human being there's a certain movement and everything, just like this, just like the sun and the moon and all of that, and just like all of that, there's basically a certain orbit that they would be getting into, and that there would be a nujum, there would be the stars for you to find guidance through, the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given you from the heavens, from the skies, basically the revelation for you to find guidance through in the darkness of the land and also the sea. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you all the different details of al-ayat. Now that you recognize that you as a human being, from one soul, you basically would get all that mustaqar, all that tranquility, and all that preservation basically could only be through what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you through guidance. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just as He had basically sent from the skies water to bring in life that gives you life, that gives you basically the plants, that gives you everything that you see in greenery, that you would see probably accumulated seeds and etc., all those different things, and including the palm trees, from the pollen, what people would regard as just nothing but something flying in the air. And you would say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically designed the fruits and the branches, basically some of it near, and different types of different plants. In other words, just because you've got different shapes and different kinds of different fruits, whether that's a small circled grape, or a small circled olive, or whether that's a small circled pomegranate, you would see that the design is different. you would say that the taste is different. You may say that the shape may be slightly different, but you need to say that it was created by one Lord Almighty. Just because it may look different, it does not mean that the source of it is different. All you need to see is recognize that they're coming through the same process. The paradigm is the same, whether we're speaking about bringing out the life from a small seed or you coming out of a sperm. The idea of going and becoming basically to life, you as a human being, is the same process that you would see in living things in nature. It's the same idea. The force is basically by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the same idea that you are like a small seed in a sperm. You would grow and then you would become a living thing, and everything would be in a certain orbit. Everything would basically function in order to bring you all the blessings that you would have, to give you all the different things that you would need, whether from the sun or whether from the moon, to make sure that you don't drown in the ebb and flow and all of that, and that to basically make sure that everything is basically something that you would say in terms of different functions, whether that's in al-falq, or whether that's in creating something as in husban, or whether that's in something in al-ikhraj, or whether that's in something in creating al-istiqrar, or al-ida', or whether it's in something in sending down. All of the forces are all coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, different functions, different things in nature, different forms, different shapes, different colors, different things, whether it's green, yellow, red, etc., whatever, whether shape, force, process, whether it's function, etc., all of it is basically controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the thing. The theme is basically letting us see in this universe, whether you're speaking about small pieces or bigger pieces, small pieces or bigger pieces, or whether you're talking about the function or whether you're talking about a process, a function, a process, small elements, big elements, all of it is basically sent for a number of different basically reasons. What are those reasons? Number one is فَأَنَّا تُؤْفَكُونَ. Why would you deny the fact? Number two, to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Aziz al-Alim. Why? Because in order to understand Qadarullah, in order to understand basically the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need to reflect on those little pieces and those big pieces and see the relationship between them. Okay, and what reason? Well, that's in order to find that guidance. What other reason? For people to learn. What other reason? For people to comprehend. What other reason? For people to find faith. Simple. That's in a nutshell. Okay, I hope I was capable of summarizing what al-Tahir ibn Ashur was trying to say. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll continue. Subhanakallahum bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Subhanakallahum bihamdik. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. We'll see you all tomorrow, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. So
جزاك
here,
الله خيرا.
وإياك.
تفسير وافي ما شاء الله وكافي.
Inshallah, I hope I didn't get too far out, because I did say that people kind of got confused, but inshallah, maybe tomorrow we'll break it down even farther and make it something that hopefully will be, let me say, sometimes people when you get into too many details, they lose their focus. Like, where am I? Okay, what happened? Okay, so tomorrow, after giving all these details, now inshallah, tomorrow we're going to put the pieces together and make that idea clear, because I could see that some found the pieces of puzzles scattered. Okay, we're going to get those scattered pieces of puzzles and put them in an idea for us to see the vision. This is what we'll do tomorrow. Stay tuned to see the vision in, let's say, a better zoom in and zoom out. All right. Inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. See you tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.